So it's 105, guys. Let's kick it off.
Do
And if
it.
there are any other stragglers, I'll let them in. I recorded this awesome video about how pumped I was about this session, and I tried to post it on LinkedIn this morning, and I just like totally failed. I just could not figure out how to post a video on LinkedIn. So like when we come to growth experiments and anything we're going to do on LinkedIn, I think we're definitely starting at zero.
Starting at zero.
So I will say some of what I was going to say in that video. Basically, Craig, I consider Craig to be a legend. He may not consider himself to be a legend, but I would consider Craig to be legendary in the world around startup, early stage startup growth. And I consider Craig a legend, because we have worked with Craig years ago on a previous product. Craig helped us as an advisor and a consultant and taught us basically all the foundational knowledge we have about growth marketing and growth in general. Craig taught us. Craig is now a specialist on Growth Match, where he does part-time fractional stuff with startups. He is a 6-7x founder, multiple exits. He's an investor. He's running Growth University now, which I want to make sure he has time to tell you guys about. But the TLDR there is he basically teaches people at the best startups how to be better growth professionals. So we're incredibly fortunate that he's taking an hour today to share with us some about his knowledge and growth experiments specifically. So with that, and I think we'll have some Q&A time at the end too. I know I got a couple questions, but so write your questions down as we go. We'll monitor the chat. Otherwise, Craig, unless I missed something, let's do it.
I mean, that's going to be hard to live up to. So first of all, thank you. I will gladly accept the legendary title, but I'm not sure I deserve it. And the feeling's mutual with the team here. And I love what you guys are putting together with Growth Match. I actually think it solves a huge pain point in the market where, frankly, there's plentiful information out there on how to do stuff. But the problem we've run into, and one of the reasons why I started what I'm currently working on, Growth University, is that a lot of it's out of date. A lot of it's scattered. And what I've tried to do is bring a little bit of sense to the noise, but that's not what we're here to talk about today. What we're here to talk about today is, and thanks for those joining and those watching on the webinar after who couldn't join live. And thank you, Shelby and Zach, again for the invite today. I'm going to move really quickly. We're going to talk about experimentation, and this is going to kind of be in a couple parts. I've broken this module down. I'm going to present for a little while, and then I will show you a framework that I use. You can download a spreadsheet that you can use to plug in your own experimentation. But what I'm going to start with is kind of providing some of the context around experimentation, and then I'll kind of go into slides for a little bit, and we'll kind of have a conversation at the end. There's kind of two things that I've observed as a multiple-time founder. And by the way, I've worked within and with and advised and invested in consumer companies, SaaS companies, marketplaces. I've scaled an agency actually too. So I've been on the build side. The two things that I found that startups that really succeed and hit what I would call escape velocity do really, really well is they understand their metrics. So they build the tooling in place to understand what's working, what's not working, and why the things that are working, and why the things that are not working. That's a whole other conversation. But the modeling side of growth and of running a startup is actually way more important than what people realize. Oftentimes we just focus on customer acquisition, but usually customer acquisition isn't enough to actually get something really rolling. The second thing that I've seen really successful startups do is fully embrace experimentation, right from your most junior employees all the way up through the executive team. And I've seen this at large companies and at small. I've seen this at startups. I've seen this at non-startups. And those companies that are able to embrace their team and engage their team and trust their team to make fairly autonomous decisions on what to do in and around the product, in and around growth, and who truly own experimentation are the ones that I've seen just kind of explode in a good way. And I've been fortunate to be a part of a couple of those. rocket ships. And I've also been part of some stuff that's just completely and utterly failed. In fact, one of the case studies I'll walk you through today was a startup that had raised $150 million. And they just couldn't get through the pandemic in the travel space. And so I'll walk you through that. So with that, today's agenda, we're going to talk about how to build a proper experiment. We're going to look at some example experiments. We're going to talk about measurement and some tooling and a few other things that I'll throw in for fun. I'll share this at the end. If you go to bit.ly/growthu-experiment, you can download the spreadsheet that I'm going to walk you through at the end. We can also send out an email. We can also put it in the Growth Match Slack. If you can't figure out how to get that, just email me, Craig@growthuniversity.io. It's a pretty straightforward spreadsheet. It's one tab, but it has a lot of the nuggets in here for actually how you go about actually executing. And it just will give you a way to stay organized around growth. We're actually building a platform behind the scenes as well. So when that's launched, if you're interested, I'll reach out. As we all know, startups need to move fast. These are some just great quotes. I love the bottom one by Catherine Minshew. Launching a startup, you need to get a lot done quickly. Every day is different. Everyone pitches in with everything. It's easy for the founding team to say, we're flexible. I'll help out with everything. But when it comes to making decisions, that flexibility can spell inefficiency and disaster. And then Reid Hoffman's famous one: if you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've shipped too late. And I always equate this fast pace and many, many people that are creative with great ideas that come out. And so, it's uncommon to find a startup that can't figure out what ideas to try to execute on. But how do you stay organized, and how do you know if you're on the right track? This is how we think experimentation works. We think that we've got this great idea that's going to change the game for us. We launch it. We're going to change some buttons and some layouts. We don't really measure much. And we think conversion rates are going to be amazing. And it didn't work. Okay, well, let's go back to the drawing board. Let's change the headline. This next test is going to be great. Oh, it's going to work this time. Is it working? I'm not quite sure. And then we end up with a fail. We spend a month on something that just didn't move the needle at all. And we spent money, we spent time. What the hell happened? We're not sure. But there's actually worse things than that, right? There's worse things than failure on an experiment. Getting a false positive and building something based on bad data could actually shut a startup down. And I've got a great example for that I'll share later on. And you can also get a false negative. And so in those cases, you'll give up on something that could have been great. The famous Twitter fail well right there, this was what Twitter put up back in the olden days when their platform, you got to hand it to Twitter. They launched, they scaled on a pretty shaky platform, but they captured the users. And it's one of the reasons why they were able to grow fast. I would say worst of all, you just don't do anything around experimentation. You've got your product backlog and you put stuff out there and people kind of care about it, or maybe they don't, but you're not really thinking about constantly reinventing yourself and pushing and pushing and pushing and pressing in. And it's kind of crickets. And in my opinion, that's the worst scenario to be in. So what's the team to do? Start by building proper experiments. Now, I realize not all of us have enough volume and velocity to quantify all this yet. When I talk about experimentation, I'm going to talk about it in more of a broad sense than a scientific sense. So we'll get into statistical significance and all that stuff for fancy smart people. But the stuff I'm talking about is more directional in nature. And there's really a few core steps here to build experimentation into your culture. And starting kind of at the lowest level, one is, regardless of where you're focused within your startup, build a hypothesis for something that you think with conviction you can move. Make sure you've got some control or some baseline that you establish so that you know what you're comparing yourself against as you roll out the experiment. Write down whatever variance you have for your experiment. Know how you're going to measure the experiment and keep yourself accountable. Track your results and then do what I call kill, scale, or hold steady. And what that means is that sometimes your experiment's not going to work. Sometimes it's going to work. Sometimes you need to leave it alone. Sometimes you need to kill it. Sometimes you need to go all in on it. I'll show you examples of each. So just back to the basics. When we talk about a hypothesis, each test, each thing that you're trying within your startup should start with a testable hypothesis. So for example, by doing or not doing something or an action, we believe that some metric is going to be impacted. Remember I said the metrics are important. When you're running experimentation or building features, you have to understand what is the thing that we're trying to move the needle on. Because if you can't quantify it, then it's unlikely going to lead to a result that you're going to be really happy with. You'll lose track of what's a false positive, false negative, or what actually matters. Okay. Next thing you want to do is determine your control. So this is what you're measuring against. And this is kind of a scientific term, right? But usually when you're putting an experiment out in the wild, you're going to measure against some historical data. And a control is synonymous with baseline. The next thing you want to do is build different versions or variants of what you're going to put out there in the wild. This is the actual guts of the experiment itself. It's the thing you're changing, adding, removing, and you measure those changes against a control. You may have more than one variant that you're going to work on, and you can run at scale. You can run simultaneous experiments, and that's a wonderful thing to be able to do, to have the luxury of having enough volume and demand to do that. More often, those of us that have lower volume sites, et cetera, we have to run experiments sequentially. And when you're building these out, this cross-functional communication with your team is really, really key. Because again, my argument is that anybody can run experiments within your organization. Somebody needs to be the champion, but it's a company-wide effort. And I'll talk to you later about how we kind of streamline this. The next is you want to determine how you're going to measure your results. How are you testing this thing? Make sure you have a way to tool and understand what's happening. And then what did you learn? What did you learn from each variant that you put out there? You want to track your notes. You want to track your metrics on a daily, weekly, or monthly basis. Usually a weekly basis for experimentation is what I've found. And then kill, hold, or scale. Are you going to kill this test? Are you going to try something different with a different variant? Does the test or experiment become a roadmap item? Did you put something out there that you put in front of customers that maybe you weren't quite ready to build, but you want to get feedback on? Does that become a roadmap item at that point? So I'm going to walk you through an experiment from Upside Travel. This was a company that I was the head of growth at, and I was also our most senior product manager. And this was started by the founders of Priceline, trying to take on the business travel space. We raised $150 million. So budget to us was never a problem, but we were having some retention and some activation challenges. So we had an idea. We said, what if we leverage the same structure that e-commerce brands use around abandoned carts? Can we get people back into our platform to book business travel? Right. So this is the slide prior to this right here. This is kind of like a sneak peek into the interface. And so it's your traditional OTA, right? You go and you select a origin, a destination, travel dates, number of travelers, et cetera, and then you get rolling. So we said, okay, well, we have a lot of people kind of starting that search process, but most of them leave. Most people looking for travel aren't quite ready to travel. So how do we adjust for this? Now, we have this methodology called the step function of growth. And what the step functions of growth are is really like, if you're not doing experimentation, you have nothing. And if you're experimenting, you're basically walking up this ladder where originally you're testing something small, probably manually. And then you start to get a little bit more polish in the experiment. And then it starts to become more of a feature. And then eventually your experiment becomes like a product item that you're constantly improving upon. Okay. And this might take 2 weeks. This might take 2 years to get to this point. But this is how I quantify some of these kind of different aspects of growth and specifically experimentation. So what we constantly want to ask ourselves as growth people is, what's the lowest effort way to test the thing we want to test? Now at Upside, we had emails from many of the users who did a search for travel. Let's just create a trigger on travel search abandonment and hit them up to see, can we re-engage them to come back? So in the earliest days, remember, this is a company at scale. We've raised $150 million. There's teams and teams and teams of people. There's a lot going on in the product, right? For users who did a trip search but abandoned it, we thought, here's our hypothesis, that we can increase the percentage of those users who end up booking by sending them an abandoned search email. So we had to determine our control. Well, we didn't have a control because we'd never done anything like this before. So we're starting from scratch. So our baseline is 0. Can only get better from here. This is the first version of the email that went out. It had no personalization at all. It came from a generic email. It said, going to a new destination, read this. hey, it looks like you're planning a new trip to a new destination. Consider reading these 3 articles. I mean, literally, this took like an hour to write. It took minutes to send out. This was a very minimal experiment. Having no prior data, we wanted to do the minimal work possible, right? So that's why it was very vanilla. There wasn't a lot of personalization. We frankly just didn't want to spend a lot of time on it. I thought it was going to fail. I was like, I'm not sure this is going to work. Let's just spend minimal time on it. Meanwhile, we're spending money on ads. We're doing a million other things. What do we need to measure? Percent of email recipients who come back and start a new session, and then the percent of email recipients who start that checkout process again. Those were the metrics we're looking at. So again, our original email, 31% of recipients started a new session. 31%. 30% of them started the checkout process. Now, remember, before doing this, we did nothing. So the metrics were 0. So we just re-engaged 31% of our denominator, of our baseline number of people, which was phenomenal. That was already a win. Okay. So what do? We've got some kind of signal here, right? It wasn't statistically significant yet. We didn't have enough volume. We didn't have enough data. So what do? Let's bake it a little bit more. The initial test left a lot out. I showed you that plain vanilla design. What happens if we personalize this a little bit more? So here's our new hypothesis. By providing personalized original content relevant to the destination where the user is searching to go to, we can increase engagement between that user and upside. Notice we don't say revenue. We're trying to increase engagement, which is a leading indicator into revenue, because remember, revenue is always a lagging indicator. So think about the metric that you're trying to impact and think about the metric before that. Like, we can't run a million growth experiments just to try to influence revenue, because revenue is going to lag behind some other things that are going to be more important, that are going to be what's considered leading indicators. So for us, that was an engagement metric. It was emails, opens, clicks, conversations with our support staff, all that great stuff. We've got some data, 31%, 30 started that checkout process. This is version 2. Hey, Upsider, it looks like you're planning a trip to Copenhagen. Based on your search, you might be interested to read our original guide, Best Places for Client Meals in Copenhagen. So with this, we had to do a little bit more work. We personalized the subject line. We personalized the content. We had to write an article. So we had to now in our system know that that user was searching for Copenhagen. And then for Copenhagen, we had to have an article that we could link over and click people out to. So this became quite a bit more work, but still not fully polished yet. Okay, so what were we looking for? Increase the percentage of users who initiate a checkout, percent of checkout initiated events compared to control. Same exact metrics that we're trying to measure against. This is the second variant. Variant 2, 36% of recipients started a new session. So 16% increase, relative increase compared to the control. 46% of recipients started the checkout process. So with this personalization, that's a 53% increase compared to the control. And remember, 4 days or 5 days before we started this experiment, none of this was happening because we weren't doing anything. So now we need to decide, do we kill, scale, or hold steady? Remember that our goal was to increase the percentage of users who start that checkout process. We saw a 53% increase there. That was pretty exciting. So we're like, okay, this experiment we're off to the races. This is a good one. And we ran a lot of stuff that failed, by the way. This one happened to work. In addition, we found other behavior. When it looked at bookings control versus variant, in our control group, 9% of our recipients ended up booking. In our variant group, 15% of our recipients ended up booking. That's a 67% increase. That all of a sudden is a material increase in checkouts for a very expensive product by doing relatively simple, straightforward things. So then we were like, okay, well, this is clearly working. How do we step this up? How do we scale this? So over the next few months, the team did more work to personalize the experience. We wrote more articles. We could handle more destinations. We just did more. And eventually we built all of that stuff in as a feature. And then we were in optimization mode thereafter. So that whole abandoned cart sequence thing that was purely owned by marketing for a while became part of the core product experience and just worked alongside every user that came through our funnel, right? And that's how we went from nothing to optimization. That was quite literally the path that we took. We got another example here. This is a totally different industry. This is a client called the Hair Shop. Another e-commerce example. By optimizing our 3-hour abandoned cart sequence subject line and design, we can drive a higher percent of purchases from abandoned cart emails. Basically what this is, it's a fancy way of saying, like, we thought coming into this engagement that we could increase the percentage of purchases from the abandoned cart email that was already going out. Here's the control. Past 30 days, 38% open rate, 1.04% open to order rate, which if you look at e-commerce metrics, I did some baseline research here, that's a very low rate. Most e-commerce brands were above 2%, 7 orders. So variant 1, what do we do? Updated the design and the calls to action. Notice what's happening in the screenshot there in the upper left. We updated the design, calls to action. We tested a subject line, another subject line test, and it kind of looked like this, right? So control is on the left, your shopping cart awaits you. On the right, we got a little more edgy. For the love of hair, don't leave us behind. So that we were trying to increase the open rate. And then we tried to personalize the actual order flow within the email that was sent out. More important was the open to order percent metric, because that's a revenue-based goal for this particular client. They're really interested in it. Control 1.04 open to purchase. So for every 100 emails that would go out, roughly 1% of the people would purchase. Variant 1 got a 3.65% open by personalizing it. Okay. Variant 2, 3.62. Variant 3, 3.78. So we reached a new baseline. What's next? So now we said, you know what? There really wasn't anything else we could do to the design and the personalization of that email. We tried 3 variants. We had our control that was 1%. All 3 of our variants were in the high 3s. We could spend the next 6 months trying to get to 4% or 5%, or move on to the next thing. So when we looked at it kind of holistically, we said, what if we just add a second email to the sequence for all the people that aren't engaging with that first abandoned cart? I mean, this is a high intent audience. These are people that added something to the cart. What would happen? By the way, when you suggest something like that at larger companies, there's a lot of pushback. There's a lot of pushback. They don't want to send more emails. They don't want to do more stuff. They think it's going to piss a bunch of people off. Got our way this time. So we proceeded to add a second abandoned cart email 24 hours after the first. It was similar to email 1. That drove, this is shocking, 50% of net new revenue compared to the first email, which produced thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars in free new monthly revenue just by reminding the user again that they forgot something. It doesn't get easier than this. So any of you that have any type of transactional experience with your product, you're likely in a situation where you're not doing enough to push people over the line. And I would go as far as push people so hard on purchase that you start hearing back from people that you're being too aggressive. Okay. A real example, another one from Upside was I ran the growth team and I was pushing my team. I was like, what I want to experiment is what we called an aggressive sequence, which was for people that came into our ecosystem. What happens if we, instead of emailing them or messaging them once every 3rd day with a call to action, what would happen if we did it every single day? My team was kind of like, that's really aggressive. But like when I was brought into this role, I'm supposed to disrupt the whole company, right? And that's one of the reasons why I was there. So the team grumbled a little bit, but got on board with sending an email every day. Well, what we didn't know was that our growth lead, one of my growth leads, screwed up. And all of those people that got put into the aggressive email sequence actually got put in twice. So they got a message at like 9 in the morning and then another one at like 8 at night, literally the same content. So this was like aggressive on steroids. That sequence won. And we did get some people that complained, hey, why are you sending me the same message twice? But it won. So what did that tell us? We had to get a lot more aggressive. I got one more example for you. This is Sandbox, totally different industry, totally different company. Sandbox sells a $4 letter product that gets sent to service members who are at basic training. They're basically cut off from the world. They don't have phones. The only way for them to hear about what's going on outside is either from their drill instructors, which don't share a lot of information, or from letters that come from mom, dad, sister, boyfriend, girlfriend. And I was the chief product officer there and also ran growth. Hypothesis: by aggressively marketing a weekly content letter in the user purchase journey, we can 5x content letter sales compared to our control. Let me unpack this. So we sold a $4 letter over and over and over again. Sold hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these transactionally every day. when I came in, I was like, you know what, let's further monetize. What can we do to further monetize? Because we have a highly engaged audience, but they're only with us for 3 months or 4 months while their kid is at boot camp. Well, let's come up with some new product ideas. So we came up with this thing called a content letter, which was it cost like $1 or $2. It was an add-on that you could say, I want to send my kid sports scores from what happened around the world in the last week. And it would get printed out and it would get added with the letter that mom or dad or sister or boyfriend or whoever was sending. So it was a new product, but it was literally like a 1-page thing. And we were selling it, but it wasn't selling very well. So this is our control. This is kind of what it looked like back here. A little bit of content, a little bit of contextual information. So in the past 3 months, 0.3% of users who purchased our main product purchased our weekly newsletter. So again, we're selling literally thousands of the letters a day. Less than 0.3% of them purchased this thing that my brilliant idea to further monetize was just a complete failure. All right. So we spent a bunch of time on that, by the way, but we thought, okay, well, what can we do here? What can we do here? So we said, let's actually start getting aggressive here. Let's start to not be annoying, but remind the user of the value of adding this content letter in. So variant 1 was we would send an SMS message 10 minutes after that original letter was sent, trying to get them to attach this add-on. Variant 2, we did a push message 30 minutes after the promo code was redeemed. Variant 3, once we had a solid baseline from this test, we wanted to start to A/B test the creative. Who thinks they know what won here? Variant 1, 2, or 3? Zach, which one do you think won?
I'm voting for SMS.
SMS. Anybody else?
I'll say 2, variant 2.
Right. Here's the thing. Amir, what do you say?
I was going to say 2.
Yeah, here's the thing. When you're going into these things, right, you actually like what you tried somewhere else probably doesn't work here, right? So I came in with like all these ideas. I'm like, I think I know it. You know, I'm gonna A/B test the hell out of the creative, and we're gonna make it look beautiful, or we're gonna make it look more lo-fi. So we put this out there. What we're measuring, I'll show you the results in a minute. We're measuring against the percentage of regular product purchases that attach. Variant 1, 2.2% attach rate with the SMS. Variant 2, 4.5% attach rate. Variant 3, no change. So putting a beautiful design together literally didn't matter at all. That horrible looking first version that I showed you before was the thing that worked, but the push was the game changer. Now, why? Why did that happen? Well, the letter sender took the plunge. They wrote the letter. They spent a bunch of time on it. They sent it out and they're feeling good about sending it to their kid. They're probably reflecting on their kid or whoever it is, getting that letter. 30 minutes later, they maybe have forgotten about it. We remind them again. We remind them of the value. We remind them of what that connection means to that outside world. We use user psychology to re-engage them, and we crush the sales. 4% attach rate now is a material change to the business with a pricing model that we hadn't even figured out yet, right? Like we didn't know if we had even priced that product correctly. Excuse me. So then we've reached a new baseline. What's next? We actually rolled this all into the product as a bit more native. So instead of like this really clunky way and you have to send a text and get it, and it's like all this stuff, that became a roadmap item. And a few months later, that was 15% of revenue on a multi-million-dollar a year business. Okay. That's how we were thinking about product development within the constructs of this type of organization, where we don't know what we need to build anymore because we're already maximized. We've already optimized everything. Everything works. It works beautifully, in fact. Well, what are the other opportunities we have? How do we get our hooks in? How do we provide more value? And can we build that into a sustainable business line? It actually was the reason why the company survived and then ended up raising a Series B post-pandemic. Right? So these little things tend to add up, but there's a human capital cost of getting involved with it. So we're going to switch gears into running and tracking experiments. So I've got a few different flavors of this. Here's some ideas that we had at one of our companies, how we organized it: backlog, in process, live, completed. I've got this experiment template, and when you download the spreadsheet, you'll get all of this stuff. And I think Shelby had actually shared this in the chat. But basically, what you want to do with each and every experiment is get it out of your brain and get it onto paper. So, what is the thing that you're trying to do? What's your hypothesis? What's your control? What are your variants? How are you measuring? What are the results? And then how do you systematize this? And so this is a screenshot of one particular startup where we're running effectively a scoring algorithm at the experiment level to try to quantify what we should work on in what order. And the highest score is the thing that should be worked on first. So I went back and kind of backdated some of this. This abandoned cart email 1 and 2 was pulled from that one example that I showed you. But I was trying to think, like, if I were gonna put it through the exact same. Actually, this was the framework that I used. So, that first one got a 21, which is why we ran that first. The second abandoned cart was why we ran it second, right? And then all the other stuff comes after. So this is a way to quantify it. Again, this is provided in that spreadsheet that I gave you. I didn't share this with you in a spreadsheet because I think you're going to want to track things however you're going to want to track them. But this was, when you think about some of the weedier details of one of the projects that I was working on, it looks like this, where you're tracking the variance. This was test 32, test 33, right? There were 30 tests above this, many of which failed, by the way. And you're tracking the revenue, you're tracking the performance versus the control. And this happens to be a manual representation of how you track it, but there are some tools and other things that you can use, and I'll share some of that with you in a little bit. Where a lot of people get hung up, though, is around statistical significance. I get a lot of pushback from fairly sophisticated founders to say, like this experimentation stuff, like how do you know it really works if it's not statistically significant? And I'm like, I agree, but statistical significance helps you quantify whether a result is likely due to chance or some other factor of interest. That's kind of the definition of it. But look, a lot of what we do in early stage startups it's based on feel and intuition and gut. And the more experimentation you can do, even if it's not perfect, the more data you're going to capture, in the closer to some level of statistical significance you're going to actually get. And so, like, that's how I would approach that problem set, is through that mindset. And so, put simply, that's the difference between knowing if your results are based on luck or based on actual data. And when we think about the components of what makes up an experiment, from a number standpoint, it's sample size. So how many people are exposed to the thing that you're testing? Again, what is your control data and your variance? What is your risk tolerance? Now, Shelby and Zach have seen me operate. I mean, we ran a program called Grow in Public, where my company bought another startup on MicroAcquire, thought we could, we're amazing growth people. We're like, we can just grow this thing. Well, when we bought it, I didn't realize that the platform was a total disaster. So like, we presented this thing, like, we're going to buy this startup and sell it. But when we got under the hood, this product was going to take up all of our time. We didn't even have time to get to the marketing side of it. We ran Grow in Public as an experiment company-wide. We just shut it down 2 weeks ago. It's okay. It's okay. Not everything that you're gonna do is gonna work. In fact, if you're doing a lot of stuff that is always working, then you're not pushing yourself hard enough. I call it jerking the wheel. Be ready to make significant changes quickly to your model, to your pricing, to your audience, to your product, to your marketing, so that you can understand with conviction what's working. When we think about sample size, this is how many users are you testing against. The more volume you have, the faster you're going to get to that interval. If you got low volume, you need to be willing to take on a little bit more risk and say, you know what, if this works, it might be because of luck. Optimizely's got a great A/B test sample size calculator. So if you want to be scientific about this, what you'll do is you'll go to just Google Optimizely A/B test sample size calculator, and it'll ask you a few questions, and you fill it in. And you notice here with 80% statistical significance, I need 2,500 people in my variant. If I raise that to 95% statistical significance, so meaning like my fail rate is really low, I have to now get 2,900. So if you're a lower volume platform, you may not have the luxury of doing everything statistically significant. Like you literally may never have enough data in the first 3 to 6 months. And therefore you'll just decide not to run experimentation. I don't think that's a smart move. I would say just lower your risk threshold. Be okay taking on a little bit of the risk and just understand what you're looking for. Your control data, again, we've gone through this, but it's basically what you're basing your tests off of. Your risk tolerance. In early days of experiments, I want to take on a lot of risk. Early stage startups, I want to take on a lot of risk. When I look at, investment or advisor gigs or even stuff that my team works on, we want to work on stuff that has like explosive potential, but maybe is rough around the edges. And then we're going to look for a signal that we're on to something. And then over time, we get more scientific. With Growth University now, we have enough data where we can run statistically significant true A/B tests. But for the first year, no way. We just didn't have enough volume. And again, you may need to tune your software if you're using testing software. By default, they always crank you into like a 95% statistical significance interval, which means that you need a lot of volume. So let's look at a few common problems. And we'll look at the spreadsheet. Common problems. Why do experiments fail? Usually it's too small of a change, too little risk. I mean, that's almost always, look, you may have bad ideas, and I would encourage you to put any and all bad ideas out there, and you'll learn pretty quickly. And you also learn on your team, like who's coming up with ideas if you engage your team. It's a really fun process. We talk about growth every week at my company. You'll fail because you didn't give enough time. You'll fail because you didn't give enough volume. And so here, what we're looking at is too small of a change, too little risk. So here I've got a control group with 10,000 users, variant A with 10,000 users, 2.4% improvement from baseline. In this case, this is statistically significant. This is from the Firebase platform. Most of us, though, don't have this volume. Google did a test where they tested 41 shades of blue. 41 shades of blue on their buttons to see like what would happen. And it turns out one of them was better. But I mean, they have millions and millions and millions of unique users and visitors that they can test against. But sometimes little changes do add up. But as a founder, I would urge you to look for big swings first. So the areas that I focus in on are pricing, your initial UX, your initial messaging. Those are the big three that you're likely going to get. I don't want to say 100% of the time, but I'd say 80% of the time, if you present me with your startup, myself or somebody on our team can find a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit for you. We had an account last week that we ran a Google ad audit on. And we were able to get a 400% increase in traffic for an 80% reduction in cost by like finding low-hanging fruit and just tuning stuff. But we know exactly what we're looking for. Okay. So like those little changes do add up, which is why there's value, I think, in working with folks like on the platform that Shelby and Zach have created, right? Where you're getting an outside perspective of what's happening. But most of the times, like, right, we're just working with a much lower volume. Now, experiments also fail because we don't give enough time. If you're not running a stats engine with your experiments and, if you're not going big, then you may just not have enough data yet to get a signal. Translating that to early stage, your gut may say something's not right here. And often we want to trust our gut if we don't have enough data. And then obviously volume is a big one. What I would do if you have very low volume hitting your website is just radically change one variable at a time. Double your pricing, reduce your pricing in half, those types of things. See what happens. Let it run for a week, let it ride for a week. And then lastly, experimentation is a team sport. So you want to build a culture of experimentation. And if you're the boss, please enable your team to take risk. Nobody on my team ever gets in any trouble if they do something wacky that doesn't work. Where I get frustrated is when I'm the one coming up with all the ideas. Those situations do not work well for me. And so I try to find and hire and engage and retain people that have that experimental side to them and that intellectual curiosity where they want to They want to test to figure out what happens if I do X, Y, or Z. Sometimes that means we lose money. Delegate someone on your team to capture growth ideas from the team and make sure that that list is viewable by all. Use that spreadsheet that I sent you. Do this every week. Every Monday, we look at growth. We look at experiments. There's a few testing platforms. I'll go really quickly here. Google Firebase, it's totally free, works with native and web apps. Mixpanel, quite a bit more expensive. Fantastic platform for A/B testing, hooks right into your product. Optimizely, even more expensive, used to be the gold standard. I don't know if I'd recommend it anymore. It's just they've gotten pretty niche down, but it's still a good platform. And then A/B testing with ad channels. Little known fact that you can actually test, you can basically A/B test ads in Facebook using dynamic creative. The system will optimize itself for each person and each ad. So you put in a whole bunch of pieces of creative, a whole bunch of messages, a whole bunch of headlines, and it will actually optimize. It will mix and match those messages and assets to the person who they think with the right variant that's going to drive the most engagement. You can do this with search as well. So I think this is, what is this? Oh, this is, I ran an experiment on this product that I was selling on one of my old websites. So, you can see I put in like 12 or 13 headlines, a bunch of descriptions, and then you can basically test to see what's resonating. I would urge you to download the growth spreadsheet. If you love this stuff, I have a product called Trajectory. It's not cheap, but myself and the team run growth for different startups. You can check it out there at Trajectory. And then what I want to do is I actually want to show you, in case you didn't have a chance, I want to show you the spreadsheet that I've made available. So hopefully those of you on the call and those joining after can access this. And let me walk you through what this actually is so that you can use it. So column A is an experiment name. So just put in the name of your experiment. I'll use SEO push high rank experiment name as the example. So I'll use row 3. What's the hypothesis? My hypothesis here is building 5 keyword focused landing pages. We can drive demand. I've kept it kind of generic for you. These are in that spreadsheet as examples. Feel free to hack with them. Details, build out 3 pages for each of the following keywords: retention, monetization, and experimentation. And what I did here is I went and did a quick search to see how much search volume is forecasted by each of these keywords. And then I'm going to go build out a campaign for each of those. Again, I'm oversimplifying it. What's important here with this spreadsheet, the stuff that you want to know is you want to get to a score. And what the score is the score is simply the number of conversions that you expect times your confidence. And confidence is on a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 basis. You can actually hack the algorithm to be whatever works for you. In this case, it's a 1 to 5 divided by effort. And the effort is the amount of time in team days or in people days the experiment's going to take. And so what I've done here is I've provided you stuff in yellow that you can update yourself. So there's 4 pieces to worry about here. So you have to build your hypothesis, you have to build your test, right? But let's say that you've done that and you've got 5 or 10 or 15 ideas. This one for SEO. What I want to try to do is quantify, in my case, my top of funnel goal. For my company, it's a traffic goal. For Sandbox, it was an app install goal. For your company, it might be something else, but your top of funnel is usually some kind of traffic goal. So I'm saying, based on what I know with the retention, monetization, experimentation, all the search volume that I've done some research here, I think I can drive 15,000 unique visitors over to my website. Okay. My EPAG goal, I call that EPAG or endpoint acquisition goal. That is the conversion metric that we're looking for. And this is not a revenue metric yet. This is like a lead metric. What do I think? What's my best guess based on other stuff I've done? What percentage of that traffic from that source is going to convert into a lead? In my case, it's will 10% give me their email address, which is roughly what we get. And then what percentage of them are going to become, in our case, a subscriber, right? So my end goal here is to map out the number of subscribers that I think I'm going to get for my product based on the experiment. And I've inflated this a little bit for illustrative purposes, right? But what we're trying to look at is, okay, well, if I do all this stuff, SEO push versus just simply spinning up Facebook campaigns and spending $5,000. Okay. How many subs am I going to get? And how do I quantify those subs against my confidence and the effort that I'm going to get? And that's what the math will give you. So what this is telling me is that I should just go spend $5,000 on Facebook. Now, if you don't have $5,000 to spend on Facebook, you probably shouldn't have put that experiment together in the first place. But if you do, what you want to do is quantify the effort of that experiment against everything else. And if this is my company, what I would do is I would say, okay, my marketing team, you've got $5,000, go see if you can get 50 subs or whatever the number comes out to be, and I'm quite confident that that's going to drive it. And my SEO consultant, I'm going to say, go build me these three campaigns. And let's put them out there and let's measure it for 3 months. And will I get the 75 subs at the end of 3 months? The thing I've skipped here is the interval. You want to document the interval of which you think you're going to get results. And it comes up with this score, right? And that's it. So what you want to do is build out a whole bunch of these ideas, figure out how to quantify it. I've given you a baseline to build a score on, but I've worked all sorts of different scoring algorithms. Part of it is going to be your own secret sauce, confidence, effort against some deliverable metric is how I would put this together. You can use my math if you want, you can hack it. Some of these columns aren't always used for example, this one, this test discounted free trialers. If you look at this in your spreadsheet, I already have their emails. So there's like the traffic goal and the lead percentage doesn't really matter. What I'm trying to do is I'm saying, I think I can get 5% of that audience to convert, right? So this 50 is based on 5% times the 1,000 emails that I have on that list. Okay. Versus this 75 is 15,000 traffic times the 10% times the 5%. So we reduce the lead. That's how the math looks. So get in, hack around, have some fun with it. The end. Questions?
I'm clapping.
Woo! All right.
That was awesome, Craig. We have 8 minutes, and I'm sure that some folks have questions. I wanted to kick that off real quick with just a quick question, because I hear this question from other founders pretty regularly, and it's something that I've struggled with myself as well. Is a lot of, and this is maybe a little bit more applicable to B2B scenario, enterprise SMBs, than it is to consumer. But I think there's this common scenario where your early go-to-market is outbound, and you're doing, whatever that is, whatever channel you're using, but you're kind of hacking this like do stuff that doesn't scale approach to getting your initial customer base. And at some point you get to this point where you feel like you need to work on what you think would be better for the long term. So that commonly looks like, okay, we need to switch from outbound to inbound. And the struggle that I've had, and that I know a lot of other founders have, is how do you think about balancing your time between trying to improve what you know is working but feel may not be scalable, with ideas for things that you think might be better long-term, but might maybe take a long time to work or whatever?
The meaty question. I mean, look, the way that we did this at Growth U, we've got 7 full-time team members now, and we have an agency that actually runs all of our cold outreach. In the early days, I had decided to split it between what I would consider like growth and marketing tasks, growth and sales on one side and then marketing in the other. And my co-founder took on all the marketing and I took on all the growth and sales. So for me, what that meant was that I was doing every sales call. I was writing every sales email. I was engaging with the vendor, and that continued really until a couple months ago, where I was able to, we had enough conviction on sales working and being optimized after hacking on it for 8 or 9 months, that I handed it off to somebody else. And now I'm only brought in as a closer, which has freed me up to produce more content, which is ultimately what I want to be doing. on my co-founder side, she also hit this inflection point where, there's only so many things she can do as one person. And when we were hiring, we realized that there's some connective tissue between the sales and marketing and the sales and growth and the marketing stuff. And we filled that gap with another growth person to take that off of our plates or to share that load. So we're actually doing multiple things at once. And so for us, we knew that one single channel wasn't something that we didn't have enough data to say, like, if we only focus on outbound, we're going to be successful, right? Like, we had some indicators of it, but one of the reasons why we raised capital was to be able to press in on a 4-prong approach: sales, outbound sales, paid acquisition, partnership strategy, and organic social. And what it's meant for us is that we've really needed somebody in each of those core roles, because you simply can't do it all. So in your case, I'm probably thinking about, well, what are the things that are more or less like automatable at this point? Is there anybody you can delegate to, or is there anything you can parallel track to pull in? Spending money on paid acquisition is one of the easiest, fastest ways to drive growth, but it costs money, right? And it doesn't always work. And it doesn't work if it's not set up right. And it doesn't, the platforms are getting harder. So it's a really personal scenario thing, but that's the way we looked at it, is rather than saying like, I the founder, have to continue taking it on. And I was already working probably 70-hour weeks at that point, right? Literally couldn't take on any more work, days completely full. We said, well, where do we optimize? Okay, well, sales qualification. Before I could delegate sales, we had to qualify a lot better. So we built the systems in place for that. We built an MQLs and SQL scoring in HubSpot. We solved all of those problems. And that allowed me to free up in other areas. And we've had to systematically look at that internally. And look, I think many of us at my company are fairly senior operators. So we kind of know where to look for this stuff. But earlier stage founder, they don't know, right? They just don't know. And so they have to just lean into the areas where it makes most sense. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's how we looked at it. We hired.
Yeah, I would kind of summarize it, I guess, by saying, look for ways to make your outbound or whatever your initial go-to-market, tactics are more efficient.
Yes.
And basically free up time
You have to
work on the longer term stuff.
My last summer into the fall, I was super busy and I was closing nothing. And we realized that we just weren't doing a good job on qualification. Yeah. It wasn't that outbound wasn't working. Outbound wasn't working, but it was my fault. It wasn't working. It wasn't the vendor's fault. So, a lot of other founders have said, fire the vendor. No, that wasn't the issue. The issue was qualification.
Cool. Who else has questions? Amara or anybody else have a question?
Yeah, I have a question. So I'm in a very early stage startup, right? And so we haven't reached product market fit. So I guess growth for us is still not in the near future, really, I guess, until we get to product market fit. But you mentioned something about building in public. What's the value in that? Why did you guys decide to do building in public?
I mean, building in public is kind of like a big thing on Twitter now. It's basically like sharing your wins and losses transparently. I like doing it because if you think about our 4 ways that we go after customers, one is organic social. Sharing stuff on organic social about our wins and losses. When I talk about founder stuff and struggles and all that stuff, it resonates with the audience. It's not a direct conversion pathway, but it opens us up in net new channels that gets us in front of more people. My Twitter profile every month will get anywhere between 100,000 and 400,000 impressions. And I've only got 3,800 followers or something, maybe not even that many. It's a highly engaged audience though, but I've invested heavily in that because that's where part of our audience lives. A lot of founders hang out there. So building in public allowed us and allows us to kind of share some of that stuff. It's just a fancy way of saying like putting our shit out there and like being a little bit vulnerable and being a little bit aspirational and sharing in it and, having DMs open and talking. And we do that across multiple platforms.
Thank you.
Yeah, I definitely hear a push to work in public across lots of different. It's a thing for independent consultants as well, right? It gives you very engaging content to tweet, post.
Yeah, absolutely. People want that authenticity, right? Like one of the things that we keep hearing about our brand is that people feel like they can trust us and that we've got their back. And that's true, right? Even if you're not a paying member, We've had people contact us in an emergency where like their whole thing has been shut down. We'll help them out. We don't have to monetize everything. Like there's ways to give back while growing your audience and reach, and do some stuff for free. And then when you ask, people are much more willing to get out their credit card because they trust you. They like you. You've given them some value, right? I think that's what a lot of this whole thing is about. And I love the way that's gone in the industry, actually.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
We are at time. I wish we could chill and ask more questions. I'd probably like to take all of the remaining afternoon off of Craig's calendar and ask him questions. But I won't do that. Craig, that was a super awesome presentation. Everyone who joined, anybody watching later, you will have already received the video, but you guys will get that. I'll include the download link for the worksheet. Definitely check out Growth University. That's Craig's startup now. And we will be back next month with another specialist workshop, another workshop kind of like this. I believe next month is an early stage brand workshop. So it's kind of like a rapid fire framework to creating some structure around your brand when you're early stage. So Craig, always a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Likewise.
Super generous of you to take the time to do this. Thank you.
Thrilled to be here. Thanks so much, everyone. Peace.
Thanks, guys.